Hook, in the marble halls of Astoria Palace, where whispers carry more weight than shouts, and tradition binds tighter than iron chains, a single moment of defiance would shatter decades of protocol. When Queen Consort Isabella demanded access to the late Queen Victoria's legendary golden carriage for her wayward son, Prince Marcus, she never expected Captain James Hartford, the most decorated guard in palace history, to look her straight in the eye and speak the word that would echo through the royal corridors for generations. No. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine courtyard of Astoria Palace as Captain James Hartford completed his routine inspection of the Royal Guard. For 23 years, he had served the crown with unwavering dedication, earning his position through merit rather than birthright, a rarity in the ancient halls of power. His steel-gray hair was perfectly combed beneath his ceremonial helmet, and his uniform bore the distinguished markings of a man who had protected 3 generations of royalty. James had been just 19 when he first donned a royal uniform, a farm boy from the northern provinces who had impressed the recruitment officers with his quick reflexes and unshakable moral compass. He remembered his first day vividly, how the towering palace gates had seemed to reach the clouds, how the weight of tradition had pressed down on his shoulders like a physical force. But he had adapted, learned, and eventually thrived in the complex world of royal protocol. The late Queen Victoria had personally promoted him to captain 5 years ago, recognizing his exceptional service during the attempted assassination at the Spring Festival. She had looked him in the eye during the ceremony and said, "James, you understand that this position requires more than protecting bodies. You must protect the very soul of our monarchy." Those words had become his guiding principle, etched into his heart like a sacred vow. Now, as he watched the morning shift take their positions along the grand staircase, James felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling over him. The palace had been different since Queen Victoria's passing 6 months ago. The new King Alexander was a good man, but his wife, Queen Consort Isabella, brought a different energy to the royal residence. Where Queen Victoria had been measured and traditional, Isabella was impulsive and modern, often clashing with the established ways of the palace. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the marble corridor, drawing James's attention. Lady Margaret Thornfield, the palace's chief protocol officer, approached with an expression of barely contained frustration. Her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, a wrinkled sleeve here, a slightly disheveled hairpin there. In the rigid world of palace hierarchy, these small imperfections spoke volumes. "Captain Hartford," she said, her voice tight with tension, "I need to speak with you immediately. It's about the Queen Consort's latest request." James nodded, following Lady Margaret to a small alcove away from the bustling main corridor. The walls here were lined with portraits of former monarchs, their painted eyes seeming to watch over every conversation held in their presence. Queen Victoria's portrait hung directly across from them, her kind but stern gaze a constant reminder of the standards they were expected to maintain. "She wants access to the Golden Phoenix," Lady Margaret said without preamble, referring to Queen Victoria's legendary carriage by its formal name. For Prince Marcus's upcoming engagement announcement, James felt his jaw tighten involuntarily. Prince Marcus, Isabella's son from her first marriage, had been a constant source of concern for the palace staff. At 28, he had already accumulated a string of scandals that the royal public relations team worked overtime to suppress. From gambling debts to inappropriate relationships with foreign dignitaries' daughters, Marcus seemed determined to test the limits of royal tolerance. The Golden Phoenix was more than just a carriage. It was a symbol of the monarchy's enduring strength and dignity. Crafted in 1847 by the kingdom's finest artisans, it had carried every monarch and their consort during the most significant ceremonies of their reign. The late Queen Victoria had used it only for the most solemn occasions: her own coronation, the marriage of her eldest son, and state funerals. It was reserved for moments when the full weight and majesty of the crown needed to be displayed. "The Golden Phoenix hasn't been used since Queen Victoria's funeral procession," James said carefully. The protocols for its use are quite specific. Lady Margaret nodded grimly. I've explained this to her 3 times. The carriage is only to be used for coronations, royal weddings of direct heirs, and state funerals. Prince Marcus's engagement, while certainly newsworthy, doesn't meet the traditional criteria. Moreover, given his reputation, many feel it would be inappropriate. James understood the delicate position they were in. As captain of the Royal Guard, he was responsible not only for the physical security of the royal family, but also for maintaining the ceremonial traditions that gave weight to their authority. The Golden Phoenix represented centuries of careful protocol, each used building upon the legacy of those who came before. What was her response when you explained the protocols? James asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. She insisted that as queen consort, she had the authority to make such decisions. When I mentioned that King Alexander would need to approve any deviation from established protocol, she became agitated. She's demanded a meeting with you this afternoon to discuss the matter further. James felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. He had dealt with difficult royals before, but Isabella presented a unique challenge. Unlike those born into the monarchy, she hadn't been raised with an understanding of the delicate balance between personal desires and royal responsibilities. Her background as a successful businesswoman had taught her to push boundaries and challenge established systems, qualities that serve her well in commerce, but often created friction within the palace's traditional structure. The afternoon meeting was scheduled in the Queen's private receiving room, an opulent space decorated with silk wallpaper and antique furniture that had been in the royal collection for over 2 centuries. James arrived precisely on time, his dress uniform impeccable and his expression neutral. He had learned long ago that in the world of royal politics, one's demeanor often spoke louder than words. Queen consort Isabella entered the room with characteristic confidence, her designer dress a modern contrast to the classical surroundings. She was an attractive woman in her mid-40s, with sharp intelligence in her dark eyes and an air of determination that had helped her build a successful fashion empire before her marriage to King Alexander. But today, there was something more in her expression, a frustrated urgency that set James on edge. Captain Hartford, she began without the usual pleasantries, I trust Lady Margaret has informed you of my request regarding the Golden Phoenix. Yes, Your Majesty, James replied with a respectful bow. She explained that you wish to use it for Prince Marcus's engagement announcement. Isabella's eyes flashed with annoyance. I don't wish to use it, Captain. I am informing you that it will be used. My son's engagement to Lady Catherine Pemberton is a significant royal event, and it deserves to be celebrated with appropriate grandeur. James chose his words carefully. Your Majesty, the Golden Phoenix is indeed a magnificent symbol of royal authority. However, its use is governed by protocols established over many decades. These traditions, Isabella interrupted, her voice rising slightly, that can and should evolve with the times. I'm not asking you to break some sacred law, Captain. I'm asking you to recognize that this family needs to modernize its approach to public relations. Marcus has had his challenges, yes, but this engagement represents a fresh start. Lady Catherine is from an impeccable family, and their union deserves royal recognition. The tension in the room was palpable. James understood Isabella's perspective. She was trying to rehabilitate her son's image and establish his place within the royal hierarchy. But he also understood something she seemed to miss. The power of royal symbols lay precisely in their restraint. The Golden Phoenix commanded respect because it was rare, reserved for moments of true historical significance. Your Majesty, James said respectfully but firmly, I sympathize with your desire to honor Prince Marcus's engagement. However, the protocols governing the Golden Phoenix were established by Queen Victoria herself, with the explicit instruction that any deviation would require unanimous approval from the Privy Council. Without that approval, the Privy Council, Isabella said with visible frustration, consists of elderly men who view any change as a personal threat. They would deny this request simply because it comes from me, not because of any genuine concern for tradition. James remained silent, recognizing the truth in her words while also understanding the delicate political reality they all navigated. The Privy Council did indeed view Isabella with suspicion, seeing her as an outsider who didn't fully grasp the weight of royal responsibility. But their caution wasn't entirely unfounded. Several of Isabella's previous initiatives had created public relations challenges that took months to resolve. "Captain," Isabella continued, her tone shifting to something more personal, "I know my position here isn't easy. I'm not naive about the challenges I face as someone who married into this family rather than being born into it. But Marcus is my son, and he's also a member of this royal family. He deserves the same consideration and respect afforded to any prince." For a moment, James saw past the queen consort's imperial bearing to the mother beneath, a woman fighting to protect and elevate her child in an environment that often seemed designed to exclude them both. It was a humanizing glimpse that made his next words all the more difficult. "Your Majesty, I understand your position, and I respect your love for Prince Marcus. However, my duty as captain of the Royal Guard extends beyond individual requests to the preservation of the monarchy's integrity. The Golden Phoenix represents something larger than any single event or person. Its power lies in its restraint." Isabella's expression hardened, her business instincts taking over. "Captain Hartford, I want to be very clear about something. This is not a request. This is an instruction from your queen consort. The Golden Phoenix will be prepared for Prince Marcus's engagement announcement, and you will ensure it happens." The room fell silent, except for the steady ticking of an ancient clock on the mantelpiece. James felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. 23 years of faithful service, his deep respect for Queen Victoria's memory, his understanding of what the monarchy represented to millions of people. In that silence, he made a decision that would change everything. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," James said quietly but clearly, "but I cannot comply with that instruction." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Isabella's eyes widened slightly, as if she couldn't quite believe what she had heard. In the hierarchical world of the palace, a direct refusal of a royal instruction was unprecedented, a breach of protocol so severe that it could end careers and reshape relationships for generations. "Excuse me." Isabella's voice was dangerously quiet. James straightened his shoulders, drawing on every ounce of his training and conviction. "The protocols governing the Golden Phoenix are clear, Your Majesty. As captain of the Royal Guard, I am sworn to uphold these traditions, even when it places me in conflict with individual preferences. I cannot, in good conscience, authorize the use of the carriage without proper approvals." The transformation in Isabella's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. Her composure, carefully maintained throughout years of royal training, cracked like ice under pressure. Her face flushed with a combination of anger and disbelief, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the unprecedented nature of James's refusal. "Captain Hartford," she said, her voice now carrying the full weight of royal authority, "you seem to have forgotten your place. I am the queen consort of this realm, and you are my employee. When I give you an instruction, you follow it. There is no debate, no negotiation, no personal interpretation of protocol. You do as you are told." James felt his own resolve hardening in response to her tone. "Your Majesty, with the greatest respect, I am not merely your employee. I am an officer of the crown, sworn to protect not just the royal family, but the institution of monarchy itself. That oath sometimes requires difficult decisions." "Difficult decisions?" Isabella's voice rose to a level that would have scandalized any royal protocol instructor. "The only difficult decision here is whether to have you dismissed immediately or to allow you the dignity of resignation. How dare you presume to lecture me about the monarchy? I didn't claw my way from obscurity to the highest position in this kingdom to be lectured by a glorified security guard." The mask had completely fallen away now, revealing the fierce ambition and frustrated pride that drove Isabella's every action. James realized that this confrontation had been building for months, perhaps since the moment she had first stepped into the palace as King Alexander's wife. Every protocol that had constrained her, every tradition that had limited her vision, every whispered criticism about her outsider status, all of it was pouring out in this moment. But James also recognized something else in her words, a fundamental misunderstanding of what the monarchy represented. To Isabella, it was a position to be conquered, a peak to be scaled through will and determination. She saw the crown as the ultimate achievement in a lifetime of achievements, not understanding that true royal power came from service rather than dominance. "Your Majesty," James said, his voice steady despite the storm raging before him, "I have never questioned your right to hold your position or your dedication to this kingdom. But the strength of the monarchy lies in its consistency, in its ability to rise above personal desires and temporary pressures. The golden phoenix is a symbol of that consistency." Isabella stared at him for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with barely controlled emotion. When she spoke again, her voice carried a cold fury that seemed to fill the entire room. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life, Captain Hartford. By tomorrow morning, you will either comply with my instruction or find yourself looking for new employment. And don't think for a moment that your precious protocols will protect you. I have more power in this palace than you realize, and I am not afraid to use it." With that declaration, she swept from the room, leaving James standing alone among the portraits of dead monarchs, and the weight of a decision that would echo through the palace halls for years to come. In the silence that followed, he could almost hear Queen Victoria's voice, reminding him that protecting the monarchy sometimes meant protecting it from itself. The die had been cast, and there would be no going back. Part 2, the news of Captain James Hartford's defiance spread through Astoria Palace like wildfire, carried by the invisible network of servants, courtiers, and officials who formed the true nervous system of royal power. By evening, the confrontation between the Queen Consort and the captain of the Royal Guard had become the most discussed topic in the servants' quarters, the administrative offices, and the private chambers of those who shaped palace policy. James returned to his quarters that night, knowing that his comfortable world was about to be turned upside down. His modest apartment in the palace's east wing reflected 23 years of dedicated service. Commendations from 3 monarchs hung on the walls, photographs from state visits, and ceremonial occasions filled a small bookshelf, and a worn copy of royal protocol and ceremonial duty sat on his nightstand, annotated with decades of careful notes. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, a rare indulgence, and settled into his favorite chair to consider his position. The smart thing would be to call Queen Consort Isabella in the morning, apologize for his momentary lapse in judgment, and arrange for the Golden Phoenix to be prepared according to her wishes. His career would continue, his pension would remain secure, and the palace would return to its normal rhythms. But as James sipped his drink, his eyes fell on a photograph taken during Queen Victoria's final birthday celebration. She stood beside the Golden Phoenix, her hand resting gently on its gilded door, her expression serene but dignified. In that moment, she had embodied everything the monarchy represented: continuity, tradition, and the careful balance between personal desires and public responsibility. "The hardest battles," she had once told him during a private conversation, "are not fought with swords or guns, James. They are fought with principles, in moments when doing the right thing costs more than we want to pay." Meanwhile, 3 floors above, Queen Consort Isabella paced her private sitting room with the restless energy of a caged predator. She had dismissed her lady-in-waiting early, needing solitude to process the unprecedented challenge to her authority. The room itself was a testament to her attempts to modernize palace life. Contemporary art hung alongside classical portraits, sleek furniture competed with antique pieces, and fresh flowers brought color to what had once been a stuffy, traditional space. Isabella's path to the throne had been anything but conventional. Born Isabella Moreau in a middle-class family, she had built a fashion empire through sheer determination and business acumen. Her first marriage to a French industrialist had ended in divorce when his gambling addiction threatened everything she had worked to build. She had been a successful single mother, raising Marcus while expanding her business across 3 continents, when she met King Alexander at a charity gala in Monaco. Their romance had been a fairy tale that captivated the public. The self-made businesswoman and the widowed king finding love later in life. But the reality of palace life had proven more challenging than either of them anticipated. Isabella's directness, so valued in the business world, was often interpreted as arrogance by the palace establishment. Her efforts to modernize royal protocols were met with resistance, disguised as concern for tradition. Marcus, now 28, had struggled even more with the transition. Raised in privilege, but outside royal protocols, he had never learned the careful self-restraint that royal life demanded. His engagement to Lady Catherine Pemberton represented Isabella's hope for his redemption. Catherine came from one of the kingdom's oldest families, with impeccable breeding and an understanding of royal expectations. The engagement announcement was meant to signal Marcus's maturation and his acceptance by the establishment. The golden phoenix had become, in Isabella's mind, the perfect symbol of that acceptance. If her son could ride in the same carriage that had carried crowned heads for over a century, it would demonstrate that he truly belonged in the royal family. But James Hartford's refusal threatened not just the ceremony, but everything Isabella was trying to achieve. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Richard," she said when the voice answered, "I need to see you first thing in the morning. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." Sir Richard Blackwood, the palace's chief of staff, had served the royal family for nearly 3 decades. Unlike James Hartford, whose loyalty was grounded in simple devotion, Richard's allegiance was more pragmatic. He understood power dynamics, political realities, and the delicate art of navigating competing interests within the palace hierarchy. "Of course, Your Majesty," Richard replied, his voice professionally neutral despite the late hour. "Shall I assume this concerns the matter of the Golden Phoenix?" Isabella wasn't surprised that Richard already knew about the confrontation. Palace walls had ears, and information was the currency of influence. "Captain Hartford has forgotten his place, Richard. I need you to remind him of the consequences of defying the crown." There was a slight pause before Richard responded. "Your Majesty, if I may suggest, this situation might benefit from a more nuanced approach. Captain Hartford enjoys considerable respect among the staff and guards. A heavy-handed response could create unnecessary complications." "Complications?" Isabella's voice carried a dangerous edge. "The only complication is a security guard who thinks he can override the decisions of a sovereign. I want him gone, Richard. Tomorrow." Another pause, longer this time. Richard had navigated palace politics long enough to recognize when competing forces were about to collide with potentially destructive results. James Hartford represented the old guard, literally and figuratively, while Isabella represented change and modernization. The Golden Phoenix had become a symbol of much larger tensions within the monarchy. "Your Majesty," Richard said carefully, "I serve at your pleasure, and your wishes will be carried out. However, I feel obligated to mention that Captain Hartford's dismissal would require King Alexander's approval." Given his fondness for the captain, Isabella's jaw tightened. King Alexander respected James Hartford enormously, viewing him as one of the few people in the palace who could be trusted to speak honestly regardless of political considerations. The king had been dealing with a diplomatic crisis involving trade negotiations with 3 neighboring countries, and Isabella had been managing palace affairs with increasing independence. But dismissing the captain of the royal guard would certainly draw Alexander's direct attention. "Then, we'll make sure Alexander understands the situation correctly," Isabella said. Captain Hartford directly defied a royal instruction. That cannot be tolerated, regardless of personal relationships. After ending the call, Isabella stood at her window, looking out over the palace gardens where lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Somewhere in those quarters, James Hartford was probably preparing for the battle ahead, just as she was. The thought brought a grim smile to her lips. In the business world, She had learned that successful people were often those willing to fight battles others would avoid. The palace, she was discovering, was no different. The next morning brought an unusual tension to the palace corridors. Staff members who normally moved with confident efficiency seemed more cautious, their conversations hushed, and their movements deliberate. Word had spread that something significant was happening, though few knew the exact details. James arrived for his morning briefing to find a message requesting his immediate presence in Sir Richard Blackwood's office. The chief of staff's domain was located in the administrative wing of the palace, a maze of offices that handled the complex logistics of royal life. Richard's personal office reflected his position, formal but not ostentatious, with carefully chosen artifacts that spoke of long service and careful political navigation. "James," Richard said as the captain entered, gesturing toward a chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming so promptly." The two men had worked together for over a decade, and James immediately recognized the careful neutrality in Richard's tone. It was the voice Richard used when delivering difficult news while maintaining plausible distance from the decisions involved. "I assume this concerns yesterday's conversation with Queen Consort Isabella," James said, settling into the offered chair. Richard nodded slowly. "Indeed. Her Majesty has expressed concerns about your response to her request regarding the Golden Phoenix. She feels that your refusal represents a serious breach of protocol and royal hierarchy." James had expected this conversation, but hearing it articulated still sent a chill through him. "Richard, you know as well as I do that the protocols governing the Golden Phoenix are clear. Queen Victoria herself established them, and they haven't been modified since her death." "That may be true," Richard replied, "but protocols exist to serve the monarchy, not the other way around. When the Queen Consort makes a direct request, there are ways to accommodate it while respecting tradition. You chose confrontation over cooperation." The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. James could have found diplomatic ways to delay the decision, to involve King Alexander in the discussion, to create bureaucratic obstacles that might have changed Isabella's mind. Instead, he had chosen to make a stand, knowing it would lead exactly to this moment. "I chose to honor my oath," James said firmly. "When I became captain of the Royal Guard, I swore to protect the crown and its traditions. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions." Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "James, we've worked together for a long time, and I respect your integrity. But integrity without wisdom can become stubbornness. The royal family is changing, evolving with the times. Queen Consort Isabella brings a fresh perspective that could help modernize the monarchy and keep it relevant. Modernization shouldn't come at the cost of meaning," James replied. "The Golden Phoenix isn't just a carriage, it's a symbol. Its power comes from its restraint, from the weight of history it carries. If we use it for every significant announcement, it becomes meaningless." "Perhaps," Richard said, "but meaning is subjective. To Queen Consort Isabella, using the Golden Phoenix for Prince Marcus's engagement demonstrates the family's acceptance of him and their commitment to his future. That has meaning too." James studied Richard's face, recognizing the careful political calculation behind his words. The chief of staff was trying to find a middle ground that would satisfy everyone while avoiding a direct conflict between the Queen Consort and the established palace hierarchy. It was skillful diplomacy, but it missed the essential point. "Richard," James said quietly, "if I compromise on this, what happens the next time? And the time after that? The protocols exist not to make our lives difficult, but to preserve something larger than our individual preferences. Once we start making exceptions, where does it end?" Richard's expression grew more serious. "James, I need to be direct with you. Queen Consort Isabella has requested your dismissal. She views your refusal as insubordination that cannot be tolerated. Now, I've managed to delay any immediate action by suggesting that such a decision should involve King Alexander, but he's expected to return from his diplomatic mission tomorrow." The words hit James like a physical blow, even though he had anticipated them. 23 years of service, a spotless record, commendations from 3 monarchs. All of it potentially ending because he had said no to a request he believed violated the principles he was sworn to protect. What are my options? James asked. Richard pulled out a formal document from his desk drawer. You could submit a formal apology to Queen Consort Isabella, acknowledging that your response was inappropriate and requesting permission to arrange the Golden Phoenix ceremony according to her specifications. I've drafted something that preserves everyone's dignity while allowing the situation to move forward. James looked at the document without touching it. The words swam slightly before his eyes as he considered what it represented. Not just an apology, but a fundamental compromise of everything he believed about his role and responsibilities. Yet he also understood the practical reality. His dismissal would accomplish nothing except ending his career in disgrace. And if I refuse to apologize? Richard's expression grew grave. Then, you'll face a formal disciplinary hearing, likely followed by dismissal. Queen Consort Isabella is quite determined on this matter, James. She sees it as a test of her authority within the palace hierarchy. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on Richard's desk. James found himself thinking about the photograph in his quarters, about Queen Victoria's words about fighting battles with principles, about the weight of tradition, and the meaning of symbols. Richard, he said finally, I need to ask you something directly. Do you believe I was wrong to refuse Queen Consort Isabella's request? The chief of staff considered the question carefully. I believe you were principled but unwise. The monarchy survives by adapting, by finding ways to honor tradition while embracing necessary change. Your refusal may have been technically correct, but it created a crisis that serves no one's interests. James nodded slowly, understanding Richard's perspective while remaining unconvinced by it. And what happens if I agree to apologize? Will that end the matter? I believe it will, Richard said. Queen Consort Isabella is fundamentally reasonable. She wants respect for her position and her decisions, not revenge. If you acknowledge her authority and cooperate with the Golden Phoenix ceremony, I think she'll be satisfied. James stared at the apology document again, weighing his choices. Outside Richard's window, he could see palace guards conducting their morning drills, young men and women who looked up to him as their leader and example. Whatever decision he made would send a message not just to Queen Consort Isabella, but to everyone who served under him. I'll need some time to consider this, James said finally. Richard nodded understandingly. Of course. But, James, time is limited. King Alexander returns tomorrow, and Queen Consort Isabella expects a resolution before then. Whatever you decide, you need to decide quickly. As James walked back through the palace corridors, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him more heavily than ever before. The portraits of former monarchs seemed to watch his progress with particular intensity, as if they too were waiting to see whether principle or pragmatism would ultimately prevail. The Golden Phoenix sat in its climate-controlled garage, magnificent and silent, unaware that it had become the center of a battle for the soul of the monarchy itself. Part 3 that evening, as shadows lengthened across the palace grounds, James Hartford found himself in an unexpected place. The private chapel where Queen Victoria had often retreated for contemplation during the most challenging periods of her reign. The small, intimate space had been her sanctuary, a place where the weight of the crown could be set aside for moments of genuine reflection. The chapel was rarely used now, maintained by the palace staff, but largely forgotten by the current royal family. James had discovered it years ago during a security inspection and had occasionally returned when he needed to think through particularly difficult decisions. The stained glass windows, illuminated by the setting sun, cast colored patterns across the stone floor, creating an atmosphere of timeless peace. As he sat in the front pew, James tried to envision what Queen Victoria would have done in a situation. She had faced countless moments when personal preference conflicted with royal duty, when the easy path diverged from the principled one. Her reign had lasted over 6 decades precisely because she understood that the monarchy's strength came not from imposing its will, but from embodying its values. His contemplation was interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps on the chapel's stone floor. James turned to see King Alexander entering the sanctuary, still wearing his traveling clothes from his unexpected early return from the diplomatic mission. The king looked tired but determined, his usually neat appearance showing signs of the strain that had brought him home ahead of schedule. "I thought I might find you here," Alexander said, settling into the pew beside James without ceremony. "Richard mentioned that you've been having some difficult conversations." James felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at the king's presence. Alexander was a thoughtful, principled man who had inherited the throne reluctantly, but had grown into his role with dignity and wisdom. Unlike his wife, he understood the delicate balance between innovation and tradition that kept the monarchy stable. "Your Majesty," James said, starting to rise. Alexander gestured for him to remain seated. "Please, James, given the circumstances, I think we could dispense with some of the formalities. I've heard about the situation with Isabella and the Golden Phoenix. I want to hear your perspective before making any decisions." For the next 20 minutes, James carefully explained his reasoning for refusing Queen Consort Isabella's request. He spoke about the protocols established by Queen Victoria, the symbolic importance of restraint in using royal artifacts, and his concerns about what precedent would be set by making exceptions for personal preferences. Throughout his explanation, King Alexander listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful but unreadable. "You realize," the king said when James finished, "that Isabella sees this as a direct challenge to her authority as queen consort. She believes that your refusal undermines her position within the palace hierarchy." James nodded. "I understand her perspective, Your Majesty. But I also believe that true authority comes from wise use of power, not from the ability to override established protocols. The Golden Phoenix has meaning precisely because it's not used casually." King Alexander was quiet for several minutes, his gaze fixed on the chapel's ornate altar where generations of royals had been married and christened. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of genuine conflict. "James, I'm going to share something with you in confidence. Isabella's position here has never been easy. The establishment views her with suspicion because she wasn't born into this life. Every decision she makes is scrutinized more carefully than mine would be. In many ways, she's had to fight for respect that others take for granted." James felt a pang of sympathy for Isabella's struggle, even as he maintained his conviction about the Golden Phoenix. "Your Majesty, I don't question Queen Consort Isabella's dedication to the crown or her right to her position. But this isn't about her personally. It's about the principles that make the monarchy meaningful." "Principles," Alexander repeated, a note of weariness in his voice. "James, I've spent the last 3 days negotiating with foreign ministers who care nothing about our principles or traditions. They care about trade agreements, military alliances, and economic advantages. The monarchy's survival depends on our ability to remain relevant in a world that changes faster every year." The king's words revealed the immense pressure he faced, trying to preserve traditional values while adapting to modern realities, balancing the expectations of his people with the demands of international relations. James began to understand that the Golden Phoenix represented different things to different members of the royal family, each bringing their own perspective to its significance. "Your Majesty," James said carefully, "perhaps that's exactly why symbols like the Golden Phoenix matter. In a world of constant change, people need anchors, traditions that remind them of continuity and stability. If we use the carriage for every significant announcement, it becomes just another vehicle." Alexander turned to study James's face, seeming to search for something in his expression. "You really believe that, don't you? You're not just being stubborn or resistant to change." "I believe it completely," James replied. "Queen Victoria chose me for this position because she trusted me to protect not just the royal family, but the institution itself. Sometimes that means making unpopular decisions." The king nodded slowly, then stood and walked to the chapel's ornate windows. The last light of day was fading, and the stained glass had lost its brilliant colors, becoming dark silhouettes against the evening sky. James, I'm going to tell you something that doesn't leave this chapel. Isabella has threatened to return to France if this matter isn't resolved in her favor. She sees your refusal as symptomatic of the resistance she's faced since becoming queen consort. She's ready to leave rather than continue fighting for acceptance. The revelation hit James like a physical blow. If queen consort Isabella left, it would create a scandal that could damage the monarchy for generations. The public, who had embraced the fairy tale romance between the king and the successful businesswoman, would be devastated. Worse, it would validate every critic who claimed that the royal family was too rigid and traditional to remain relevant. Your Majesty, James said quietly, I never intended for this to become a threat to your marriage or the stability of the crown. Alexander returned to the pew, his expression grave. I know that, James, but we're dealing with a situation that goes far beyond a single carriage or ceremony. Isabella needs to feel valued and respected within this family. Right now, she doesn't. The weight of the moment pressed down on James like a physical force. Everything he had worked for, everything he believed in, seemed to hang in the balance. Yet beneath his sympathy for the king's position and his understanding of Isabella's struggles, his core conviction remained unchanged. Your Majesty, he said finally, what if we found another way to honor Prince Marcus's engagement? The royal collection includes other significant carriages and artifacts. We could create a ceremony that demonstrates the family's support without compromising the Golden Phoenix's symbolic importance. Alexander considered this suggestion, hope flickering in his expression. Do you think Isabella would accept an alternative? James thought carefully before responding. I believe Queen Consort Isabella wants respect and recognition for Prince Marcus. If we can demonstrate that respect through other means, perhaps using the silver crown carriage, which has its own distinguished history, she might find it acceptable. The silver crown carriage, Alexander mused. It was used for my father's wedding to my mother. It has significant precedent for royal engagements without the specific protocols that govern the Golden Phoenix. For the first time since the crisis began, James felt a spark of optimism. The silver crown carriage was indeed appropriate for significant royal announcements, and its use would demonstrate the family's commitment to honoring Prince Marcus without setting a problematic precedent. Your Majesty, with your permission, I could speak with Queen Consort Isabella directly, not as someone refusing her request, but as someone offering an alternative that achieves her goals while respecting established traditions. Alexander looked skeptical. James, Isabella is quite angry with you right now. Are you certain that a direct conversation is wise? Sometimes, Your Majesty, the most difficult conversations are the most necessary ones. If I can help her understand that my refusal wasn't personal or political, but principled, she might be willing to consider alternatives. The king stood again, his decision made. Very well, James. I'll arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning. But understand that if this doesn't work, if Isabella remains determined to leave, I'll have to choose between my wife and my captain of the guard. And that's not really a choice at all. James understood completely. A king's first loyalty had to be to his family and the stability of his reign. If his refusal ultimately forced that choice, he would resign before putting Alexander in that position. As they left the chapel together, James felt the weight of everything that would be decided in the next 24 hours. The Golden Phoenix remained in its garage, silent and magnificent, while the fate of the monarchy's traditions hung in the balance. That night, James barely slept, rehearsing different approaches to his conversation with Isabella, trying to find words that would bridge the gap between principle and pragmatism. Meanwhile, 3 floors above, Queen Consort Isabella sat in her sitting room, staring at a photograph of Prince Marcus and Lady Catherine, wondering if her fight for respect was worth the potential cost of her marriage and her stepchildren's future. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would determine whether tradition and change could coexist or whether one would have to yield completely to the other. In the morning, the future of the monarchy would depend on whether 2 strong-willed people could find common ground in their shared love for the institution they both served. The palace held its breath, waiting for dawn. Part for the morning sun painted the palace walls in shades of gold, and rose as James Hartford prepared for what might be the most important conversation of his career. He had chosen his dress uniform with particular care, each decoration and insignia representing years of faithful service and unwavering dedication. If this was to be his final act as captain of the royal guard, he would meet it with the dignity befitting his position. Queen Consort Isabella had agreed to the meeting with obvious reluctance, and only at King Alexander's personal request. She had spent a sleepless night of her own, alternating between fury at James's defiance and a growing awareness of the larger implications of her ultimatum. The thought of leaving Alexander and returning to France had seemed empowering in the heat of anger, but in the cold light of dawn, she recognized the devastation it would cause to everyone she had come to care about. The meeting was arranged in the king's private study, a room that had witnessed countless historic decisions over the centuries. Unlike the formal receiving rooms used for official business, this space felt more personal, with comfortable chairs arranged around a fireplace and family photographs scattered among the official portraits. King Alexander had hoped that the intimate setting might encourage a more open dialogue. James arrived precisely on time, as was his habit, and found Isabella already seated near the fireplace. She wore a simple but elegant dress in navy blue, her hair pulled back in a style that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. Despite her obvious tension, she maintained the regal bearing that had served her well in her business career and royal life. "Captain Hartford," she said with cool formality as he entered. "Your Majesty," James replied, bowing respectfully before taking the seat King Alexander indicated. For a moment, the three of them sat in uncomfortable silence, each aware that the next few minutes could reshape not only their relationships, but the future direction of the monarchy itself. Finally, King Alexander spoke, his voice carefully neutral. "Isabella, James has requested this meeting because he believes there might be a path forward that addresses your concerns while respecting the protocols he feels bound to uphold. I think we all agree that the current situation serves no one's interests." Isabella's gaze remained fixed on James, her expression guarded but attentive. "Captain, I'm willing to listen, though I confess I'm struggling to understand how your position has anything to do with protocol rather than personal opinion." James had anticipated this opening, and he chose his words with careful precision. "Your Majesty, I want to begin by apologizing for the tone of our previous conversation. Regardless of our disagreement, I should have expressed my concerns more respectfully." The apology seemed to catch Isabella off guard, and some of the tension in her posture eased slightly. "I appreciate that, Captain. I may have been forceful in my response as well. Your Majesty, I've spent considerable time thinking about your perspective, and I believe I understand what you're trying to achieve. Prince Marcus's engagement to Lady Catherine represents a fresh start, an opportunity to demonstrate the royal family's confidence in his future. You want the Golden Phoenix because it would send an unmistakable message about his place in this family." Isabella nodded slowly, surprised by James's evident understanding of her motivations. "Exactly. Marcus has faced challenges, but this engagement shows his growth and maturity. The family needs to stand behind him publicly." "I agree completely," James said, and meant it. "Prince Marcus deserves the family support, and the engagement announcement should reflect that. My concern isn't with honoring the prince, but with the specific symbolism of the Golden Phoenix." King Alexander leaned forward slightly, sensing an opportunity for dialogue. "James, explain to Isabella what you explained to me about the carriage's significance." James gathered his thoughts, trying to find words that would convey not just the technical protocols, but the deeper meaning behind them. "Your Majesty, Queen Victoria commissioned the Golden Phoenix specifically to represent the monarchy at its most solemn and significant moments. She deliberately limited its use because she understood that symbols gain power through restraint. Each time it's been used, it's added to the weight of history it carries." "But history evolves, Captain," Isabella replied, though her tone was more curious than confrontational. Perhaps Queen Victoria's restrictions were appropriate for her time, but we live in a different era. The monarchy needs to demonstrate its vitality and relevance. I don't disagree with that principle, James said carefully. But I believe there are ways to demonstrate vitality without diminishing the power of our most sacred symbols. That's why I wanted to propose an alternative. Isabella's eyebrows rose slightly. An alternative? King Alexander smiled encouragingly. James, tell Isabella about your idea regarding the silver crown carriage. James leaned forward, his enthusiasm for the solution evident in his voice. Your Majesty, the silver crown carriage has its own distinguished history. It was used for King Alexander's parents' wedding, for the christening of Prince William, and for several significant royal announcements. It would be entirely appropriate for Prince Marcus's engagement, and it would demonstrate the family's strong support without creating precedent issues. Isabella considered this suggestion, her sharp business mind immediately grasping both its advantages and limitations. The silver crown carriage is certainly beautiful, and you're right about its history, but it doesn't carry the same impact as the Golden Phoenix. People would notice the difference. James agreed, but we could frame that difference positively. The engagement ceremony could emphasize the carriage's connection to your family's history. The same carriage that carried King Alexander's parents to their wedding now carries his stepson to his engagement. It becomes a story of continuity and family unity. King Alexander watched his wife's face as she processed this idea. He could see her evaluating not just the symbolic implications, but the practical public relations aspects. Isabella's business background had taught her to find creative solutions to seemingly intractable problems, and James's proposal offered exactly that kind of creative thinking. It's certainly more thoughtful than I expected, Isabella admitted. But I have to ask, Captain, if I had requested the silver crown carriage initially, would you have approved it immediately? James met her gaze directly. Yes, Your Majesty, without hesitation. The silver crown carriage falls well within established protocols for significant royal announcements. I would have been honored to arrange its use for Prince Marcus's engagement. The honesty of his response seemed to affect Isabella profoundly. For the first time since the crisis began, she understood that James's refusal hadn't been about her personally or about resistance to change. It had been about maintaining the careful distinctions that gave meaning to royal symbols. Captain Hartford, she said slowly, I owe you an apology as well. I assumed your refusal was politically motivated, another example of the establishment's resistance to my family. I didn't consider that you might have genuine principle-based concerns. Your Majesty, your assumption was understandable given the challenges you've faced. But my oath is to the crown itself, not to any political faction within the palace. When I see threats to the monarchy's integrity, I'm bound to respond, regardless of who presents them. Isabella was quiet for several minutes, staring into the fireplace as she weighed her options. King Alexander remained silent, recognizing that his wife needed to reach her own conclusion without pressure from him. Finally, she turned back to James with a decisive expression. Captain, if I agree to use the silver crown carriage instead of the Golden Phoenix, I need your word that the ceremony will be handled with the full dignity and grandeur appropriate to a royal engagement. Prince Marcus has endured enough whispered criticisms and half-hearted support. You have my word, Your Majesty, James said solemnly. Prince Marcus will receive every honor and courtesy befitting his position. The ceremony will be magnificent, and I need your commitment that this solution represents a new understanding between us, not just a temporary compromise. I won't face this kind of resistance every time I propose changes to royal protocols. James considered this carefully. Your Majesty, I can promise that any future requests will be evaluated on their merits, with full consideration of both tradition and the evolving needs of the monarchy. If changes serve the crown's interests while respecting its core values, you'll have my support. King Alexander felt a wave of relief wash over him as he watched the tension between his wife and his captain of the guard begin to dissolve. Isabella, does this solution address your concerns about Marcus's engagement announcement? It does, she replied, then turned to James with something approaching a smile. Captain, I have to admit that I underestimated you. I expected rigid adherence to rules without regard for their purpose. Instead, you've shown me that tradition and adaptation can coexist. James returned her smile, feeling genuine respect for Isabella's willingness to find common ground. Your Majesty, you've reminded me that protecting the monarchy sometimes means helping it evolve thoughtfully rather than simply preserving it unchanged. Over the next hour, they worked together to plan the engagement ceremony, with Isabella contributing her event planning expertise and James offering his knowledge of royal protocols and logistics. What emerged was a celebration that honored both tradition and innovation. The silver crown carriage would carry Prince Marcus and Lady Catherine through the capital, followed by a reception that showcased the royal family's unity and support. As the meeting concluded, King Alexander felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The crisis that had threatened to tear apart his family and potentially damage the monarchy had instead become an opportunity for greater understanding and cooperation. James had demonstrated that principle could coexist with flexibility, while Isabella had shown that strength could include willingness to compromise. Captain Hartford, Isabella said as they prepared to leave, I want you to know that I respect your position and your dedication to the crown. I hope we can work together more effectively in the future. Your Majesty, it would be my honor, James replied. The monarchy is stronger when we combine respect for tradition with openness to necessary change. 3 weeks later, Prince Marcus's engagement ceremony took place exactly as planned. The silver crown carriage, polished to gleaming perfection and decorated with flowers from the palace gardens, carried the engaged couple through cheering crowds in the capital. Isabella stood beside King Alexander on the palace balcony, watching with obvious pride as her son waved to the assembled people. James, resplendent in his dress uniform, commanded the ceremonial guard that flanked the carriage route. As the silver crown passed beneath the palace gates, he reflected on the lessons learned during the crisis. The Golden Phoenix remained in its climate-controlled garage, its dignity intact, and its symbolic power preserved for truly momentous occasions. But the monarchy had proven its ability to honor the past while embracing the future. That evening, as the palace settled into its normal rhythms after the successful ceremony, James received an unexpected visitor. Queen Consort Isabella knocked on his office door, carrying a small wrapped package. Captain, she said with a warm smile, I wanted to thank you personally for making Marcus's day so special. The ceremony was everything I hoped it would be. It was my pleasure, Your Majesty, James replied. Prince Marcus and Lady Catherine looked truly happy. Isabella handed him a package. This is a small token of my appreciation, and, more importantly, of my apology for questioning your integrity. Inside the elegant wrapping was a photograph from the engagement ceremony, showing James at attention beside the silver crown carriage. But it was the inscription that moved him. To Captain James Hartford, who taught us that true strength comes from knowing when to stand firm and when to find a better way. With respect and gratitude, Queen Consort Isabella. As Isabella left his office, James placed the photograph on his desk beside the picture of Queen Victoria. Two very different women from different eras and backgrounds, but both committed to the monarchy's success. The juxtaposition seemed fitting, a reminder that the crown's strength lay not in unchanging rigidity, but in its ability to honor the best of the past while embracing the promise of the future. The Golden Phoenix remained in its garage, patient and magnificent, waiting for the next truly historic moment when its presence would add weight and dignity to the monarchy's most solemn occasions. And in the palace halls, a new understanding had taken root, one that recognized that protecting tradition sometimes meant helping it evolve, and that true leadership required both principle and wisdom. The royal guard who had dared to say no had, in the end, helped everyone find a better way to say yes.